You are listening to Think Theory Radio.
Hello and welcome to Think Theory Radio, the show that brings you topics outside the mainstream realm of thought and ideas to make you think. And I'm your host, Damian Perdue, your guide on this metaphysical ride of audio delights. And today, I'm joined by Big Henry.
Yo, what's up, everyone?
Manning the electrical frequencies, making sure my audio is sent out into the universe, and providing you all with my intricate thoughts.
Absolutely. The smooth audio delight that is the show.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, making sure that we pay the bills and keeping us on the air, too. Somewhat.
I guess.
It's part of your responsibilities. I don't know. Today, though, I'm going to ask you, do you believe you have a soul?
I feel like people do. I feel like there's got to be something,
A soul or a spirit.
Yeah, otherwise, what are we? We're just like bags of meat kind of walking around,
Old meat bags.
Yeah, that's just unsatisfying, at least to me, to kind of think we don't really,
Yes, and that's why I asked the question today, is the soul quantifiable?
Ooh.
Can science show evidence that the soul exists? Mm-hmm. And what is a soul? Not that, I'm actually going to be able to answer that question, but...
It's a good thing to think about.
Yes. It's philosophical.
Yeah.
And it's something that goes back to ancient times. People have pondered this question. And really, we don't know when the first... we know we have records of the first written or inscribed mention of a soul, which I'll get into, and some of the different ancient cultures' beliefs in what a soul was, obviously in the philosophers, the Greek philosophers and everything. But then I really want to get into kind of more modern science. Like there's actually still people to this day doing scientific experiments trying to figure out if the soul exists. Mm-hmm. And it also kind of depends on what you think the soul is. I think people of faith, it's automatic for them. People who are I'm a little more agnostic, but I like to question everything, even things that I believe, and try to figure out, what's the deeper meaning of it all. Because that is kind of the true, this is kind of like, me and Paul joke around when we do the show, look a topic like this, we always call it, this is the meaning of life. The ongoing series on a quest for the meaning of life, episode number 793.
Sounds about right.
Because time's not linear, so in this subject.
True.
And it kind of, this question corresponds to deep thought of humans, right? So when humans first started to think the whole, basically I think therefore I am type of mechanism is when we started to question, okay, why are we here? What is keeping us going? Which eventually led to the major religions. But before that, you will have anthropologists, archaeologists will say there's evidence of funerals, burial rituals going back 100,000 years, maybe even longer. And we even have evidence now of our primate or cousins. I think it's Homo nerudi, who is not, they kind of split off from us before us, but they have recently found evidence that they also were doing burial rituals.
Interesting. So those are not Homo sapiens, they're not Neanderthals.
Yeah, this was before
their
them.
own offshoot. Okay.
And so and they believe that burial rituals are kind of evidence of humans having a belief in the afterlife, right? Mm-hmm. So this thought of, people existing outside of the physical form, there's something transphysical within us, goes back possibly at least 70,000 to 100,000 years, depending on...
Yeah, kind of like as back as our consciousness kind of goes, pretty much feels like.
Yeah, and that's the other question, too, is, because looking into it, as you go from the philosophers to the religions to modern science, does the soul transfer, the definition of a soul become consciousness, right? So now with neuroscience and even to a degree quantum mechanics, people are studying consciousness. People are trying to figure out what consciousness is, because we don't even really know what consciousness is.
Yeah.
We believe the seat of consciousness is in the brain, but we don't know. So has the consciousness, the pursuit of what consciousness is, taken the place of, trying to figure out what the soul is and what, or are they separate? That's another question. Is consciousness our kind of personality and the soul is something that is intangible, or is it all just electrochemical? Is it nothing?
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yes, these are the things I ponder, Henry.
I love it.
So going back a little, just a little ways, I'm going to go back, about like 7,000 years ago, I believe.
Okay.
This is the first inscription that we have found that mentions the soul. And it's from southeastern Turkey, which had been, I believe, upper Mesopotamia, and the site of the ancient city of Sam'al, which was part of an Iron Age kingdom. The inscription reads in part, I, Kutamua, servant of Panamua, am the one who oversaw the production of this steel for myself while still living. I placed it in an eternal chamber and established a feast at this chamber, a bull for the storm god Hadad, a ram for the sun god Shamash, and a ram for my soul that is in this steel. And the steel was set against a stone wall in the corner of a small room, which they basically converted into a mortuary shrine for who this person, Kutamua, was a royal official, and Panamua was his king. So this is the first that we have found inscription that mentions a soul.
Wow. You said that was 7,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. And, like I said, the thought is it goes back farther than that. We don't have record,
Yeah, this is just the first thing that we found that has that.
And, because this is pretty much when people first started keeping record of the written language and inscribing things. Maybe if we could interpret cave paintings, there might be some kind of symbolic.
Yeah, like ritualistic kind of honoring of life and
exactly. Some kind of there's probably some kind of symbology in a cave painting that shows like a transition, but who knows? We don't really know.
Yeah.
And but we can't ask.
If only.
And then moving on, you go into the different regions of in the world, different cultures like ancient Egypt. So in ancient Egypt, they believe the location of soul was in the main part was in the heart, but they believe the soul was composed of several parts, which was Ba, Ka, Ren, Sheut, and Ib. And Ib was located in the heart, was considered the vital force that brought human beings to life. And that's why when people would die, they would weigh their heart.
Oh, okay. I've seen like imagery of this. Where they have, like the scales, and then and that's how they like weigh your like guilt or consciousness or like
exactly. So the god Anubis would feed the heaviest hearts to the demon Amit, and depending on how much your soul it weighed. I guess if it was heavier, it meant you did a lot of dirt,
nefarious things in your life or whatever. Yeah.
And of course, Plato and Aristotle had their different versions of what the soul was. Plato believed that the soul came from the stars.
Oh.
And it would enter the human upon birth. And then when you would die, it would separate and
go back out.
Go back into the atmosphere.
Wow.
And Aristotle believed that the soul was more not separate from the human body. He believed it was part, and the soul could not be immortal. But he did believe it was composed of different parts, which I guess Plato believed too, and that it was the vegetative, the sensitive, and the rational. Was his theory, which is similar to kind of, if you think about it, the Egyptian, that the soul had different parts to it.
They kind of represent aspects of your personality or like different. Yeah.
Now, Epicurus was interesting because he believed that the human soul was corporeal and composed of small particles spread out within the entire body. And that I found interesting because, you get into, because I have some of especially when we get into this one more modern experiment with electromagnetism. And it just makes me think of kind of if there's a correlation between consciousness and quantum physics. And he's mentioning, the soul being small particles throughout the body. There's also theories that like DNA holds your consciousness, which we'll get into too. There's like God DNA, there's spirit DNA, there's all these different kind of theories, of course. And there is also the idea that your breath is your soul, which is where the word spirit comes from. So spirit in Latin, espiritu, means breath, essentially.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
And Plato was one of the first Western thinkers to bring up the idea that the soul and the breath are connected, which, I mean, it seems like a reasonable assumption to make. Yeah. If you see someone die and they're kind of the last breath.
Yeah, exactly. That's where my mind kind of went with that. I've never heard of like the breath and the soul kind of being like intertwined. But
yeah.
When you said that, that's where my mind like kind of immediately went. It was just like the last breath, just the of
exactly, yeah.
And then you're gone.
And that also is similar to ancient Chinese teachings as well. Is like that's why I don't know if you call it a martial art, but Tai Chi. When they do it's all about breath movement.
Right.
Same thing with a lot of Hindu breath work and yoga. It all has to do with the tying in of soul and breath, keeping your lungs pure, because that's part where your soul resides. But then that's also the other thing. There's different theories that throughout time, that the soul is in your brain, the soul is in your heart, the soul is in your lungs.
Right. Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting, like which kind of cultures kind of feel like it's in either the brain or the heart. I think those are like usually the main two, or like the lungs, too.
Yeah.
It kind of, it's interesting.
Let's see, different theories. Leonardo da Vinci hypothesized that the soul was located in the optic chiasm.
Interesting.
I don't know if I'm saying that word right, but it's basically the chiasm. It's the part of the brain where the optic nerves cross.
Okay.
It's located at the bottom of the brain, immediately inferior to the hypothalamus. The optic chiasm is found in all vertebrates, and he believes it's near the third ventricle of the brain. Okay.
That's a very specific, guess for him to...
Yeah. Well, it says that his views were supported by observations of change in perception following disturbances to that particular area of the brain.
That's interesting. It's kind of crazy how you would have to do, kind of science experiments or anything like that back then. You just really have to, I don't know, spend a lot of time just observing a lot of different things to kind of see,
oh, yeah,
how it's going to change, because you don't have instruments or things to tell you
Exactly, yeah, and that's why a lot of things changed once technology advanced, especially in the 1700s when we started getting microscopes.
And people could get a lot more exact, specific, and
and now even with electron microscopes and even deeper. You
can just go so granular.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's essentially why quantum physics even exists, is because there was the thought of it. I mean, this goes back to the Greeks, the atom and everything. But once we actually got the technology to investigate deeper and deeper and deeper and keep going smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. We keep finding there's more and more particles, and it just keeps going, so who knows? They always kind of think, well, this is probably going to be the one, the Higgs boson, this is it.
And then
nope, there's still something more.
Yeah, literally. It's just like a plane nose diving, but it's just never hitting the ground. There's just always something to kind of keep observing and keep.
It's the fractals. You ever see the fractal pattern? It just keeps going in and out, and it's in and out. Which is some I'm obviously it's not my original thought, but that the universe itself is, this fractal nature, and coming from, if you think about everything in existence, whether it's you, me, this microphone, a rabbit outside of the studio, it all has its origins in the Big Bang or whatever else was before the Big Bang. And now, everything is connected through these different, events throughout the universe. The carbon that makes up the majority of our body, our material, our matter, was composed in the heart of a supernova.
Right. Yeah. We're all kind of.
Yeah. Iron itself is not even from Earth. Iron is a huge part of our blood. And that came from space.
Our blood, our civilizations, our everything,
I mean, think about that. The Iron Age. Like, where would we be without that?
Exactly.
And the iron in our blood, we wouldn't be alive.
Yeah.
Same with gold, a lot of other different, substances. So there is a concept called biocentrism, which I'll get a little bit more into later, that it's a scientist and doctor who actually was did a lot of stem cell research. His name is Robert Lanza, and he came up with a concept called biocentrism, and he's written several books on it. And his belief is that biology and consciousness informed the universe. So it didn't come after, it was what started.
Interesting.
Now that could correlate to some time of scientific view that the soul exists in, some form that's quantifiable. Because that's the question I'm asking, right? Is the soul quantifiable? Is there a way? I mean, I kind of believe that there probably is some scientific reasoning, whether that foregoes mysticism or not, whether we even figure it out. We might not ever be smart enough to figure these things out. There's a lot of scientists who say there's so many questions in the universe.
Yeah, that just can never be
we'll never, we never will, because we just don't have the brain capacity to figure certain things out. Maybe, with AI, who knows?
Yeah, it can give us
it'll
a new
surpass us.
And then,
but not yet. And who knows, if that'll ever happen. But but it's interesting, when you think about that and the different concepts. So I have some really great, because this is really the main thing. I wanted to get through kind of the history of it. Why do we think about this? Because it's something that separates us, that we know of, separates us from the animal kingdom. I know that there are certain, and we do see that crows seem to show mourning, when other crows die. Other primates do seem to have some kind of burial rituals.
Yeah.
I would love, I feel like there's part of me that feels like if we could figure out how to talk to dolphins and whales, right? Which we're slowly figuring out the whale language.
Oh, are we?
Yeah. There's actually these scientists who have figured out some of the communication, and they've actually been sending sonar.
That's fascinating.
The whale sounds back to them.
Interesting.
Now, if we could figure, especially with dolphins, I mean, they're both very intelligent animals, but I feel like if the dolphins are, most scientists will say that are our counterpart or the next ones under us, right?
Right, yeah.
Intelligence-wise. And they've been around as long as us or longer than us. Now, what if they have their own concepts?
That we just can't ever grasp because we just don't have...
We don't know how to talk to them.
Yeah.
We know how to talk to them in a...
very rudimentary.
Yes, here's some fish, do a trick kind of thing,
Exactly.
But through that, we have figured out that they have their own names. They actually have these sonar, I guess if you want to call them whistles, that are particular to their individuals.
Interesting.
So that the other dolphins will use that whistle to call out to them.
Yeah.
So they do have an individuality.
That's fascinating.
Now, does a dolphin pontificate on the soul?
Yeah, exactly. Like, to what level do they kind of really introspect?
Now, that's what, now if we could communicate with other animals in that way, that could give us a kind of a different angle on thinking about the soul. Because right now we're very, inclusive. We're very,
Yeah, just very human centric, like how we're this because of,
obviously. Yeah, we're the best.
Exactly. But, do we know that or do we not?
Exactly.
up to the, Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see if we figure that out, and then we can ask them, do you have a soul? Do you believe in a soul? Do you believe in God? Or they're just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, they're just like, you guys are so intense right now.
Why do you live on land?
Yeah, you guys are
stupid.
We just swim in the water. We just have great times.
Right. All right, we got to take a quick break. If you want to give us a call, hit us up at 773-763-WCPT. That's 773-763-9278. Let us know if you have a soul. And when we return, we'll get into some of the scientific experiments to prove if the soul is quantifiable here on Think Theory Radio right after this. Welcome back to Think Theory Radio. This is Damien, and today we ask the question, is the soul quantifiable? Can we figure it out? Do we know how much it weighs? Can we reproduce it? Hopefully not, because that might be a little scary. Before we get into some of the experiments throughout the years that people have tried to figure out if there is an afterlife or if people have a life force or there's a soul, let's take a couple phone calls. We got Jim in Chicago. What's going on, Jim?
Oh, hi, Damien. How are you?
Good.
All I can think of is Billy Shakespeare said, "Conscience does make cowards of us all." And I don't know if your conscience has ever been pricked, but mine certainly has been pricked in my lifetime. And another thing, where would altruism come from? Where would empathy come from? Where would love come from? Mm-hmm. I know you can go great injury to your soul. That I know for a fact. I've seen people with injured soul. You can't see it on an X-ray machine, or you can't see it physically.
Yeah.
But I've seen people with injured souls, and you can injure your soul gravely if you keep at it. If you keep at it, you could do it. Mm-hmm. But I mean, those things, where does love come from? Where does empathy come from? How do people lay their lives down for their fellow man? I mean, how do these things happen? Why would, where would we be if we didn't contemplate, I think the conscience is part of the soul.
Yeah.
So it's in my mind, it's someplace. It's an intimate place in your being that you don't even know you can enter it, but it's a very valuable piece of the human experience. Anyway, Bill, you have a great. Stay cool, Damien. Where's your pal?
Oh, Paul, he's going to a family function, a quinceañera.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Take care, Bill. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye,
Jim. Yeah, and actually, what he brought up is a good point about emotions.
Yeah.
And it kind of depends on what you think. If you want to believe that it's all just electrochemical reactions in the brain, is there something more to it? What is love? What is empathy? What is the feeling of being hurt? These all do correlate to with the conscious experience, right?
Yeah.
And but it's also another thing that I feel like if we could communicate with animal, there's part of me that thinks like just to ask other beings outside of ourselves,
what their perspective is. Yeah, I think that would be very enlightening.
Because I think for years, 1,000 maybe whatever, depending on the culture, to believe that we're the only ones, right? We're the only ones that feel these things.
Yeah.
And now as we're studying more and we're a little bit more empathetic towards animals and things, we're realizing how much more we have in common.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of akin to like aliens and like alien life. Like it's very like naive in my opinion to just say like, oh, there's absolutely nothing just because we haven't found anything. Just based on how big and how expansive everything is, it's unlikely that we're the only ones.
Yeah.
I think it's similar to like think that we're probably not the only ones to have like consciousness and like things of that, like, but we can't know. We can't ask their questions until the technology or whatever kind of catches up to our wants and desires.
Exactly. All right, let's take another phone call. We got Tim in Lombard. What's going on, Tim?
Hey guys, speaking of your animals, right? Do animals have souls? And if they've got souls, should we be eating them? That's a good question. I was at a trade show in Chicago, downtown Chicago, this past week, which could maybe provide a solution. It was called Future Food Tech. And there was all kinds of interesting stuff going on. There was, of course, plant-based proteins. There were different products that are made by fermentation, not beyond the traditional things we think of like the alcohols, but milk-like products, egg-like products, oil-like products. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But on there was the other category that was there was cell-cultured meat. So meat that actually comes from the actual cells of the animal grown in a bioreactor and then harvested. And I don't believe that cells in a bioreactor have a soul, right? I mean, it's a bunch of cells. You grow them. So but the deeper philosophical question is, would this be a sea change in humanity because humans could now eat meat without killing an animal?
Right. Yeah, I've had this discussion with, vegans and vegetarians, and it kind of depends on who you ask what their belief is. Some have said, no, I still won't eat it because it's just basically trying to simulate meat, and it still comes from
But it's really meat. It really is meat. And I've heard the definition from vegans that you shouldn't eat something that has a mother. Okay, if it's grown in a bioreactor, it doesn't have a mother. But if it's just as nutritious, and it gets a lower carbon footprint, is it a better alternative? And would it break that change? And would it break that cycle in humanity of we don't have to kill to eat meat?
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting subject. I know that there's a company here in Chicago that's one of the main ones that is working on lab grown meat. I haven't seen it out in the wild yet. No pun intended, but
it tastes really lean.
Okay,
really lean because they haven't quite figured out how to get the fat cells into it.
Yeah.
But it's really, and it's spendy. It's really spendy.
Well, and that's the interesting thing too. You brought up is the cell part of it, because there is some, and I'm going to get into this one experiment later that actually tries to kind of dissect a cell to see if there's something that leaves it when they do that. So, and then there's theories when you get into, you could say that pseudoscience or woo-woo or whatever, but there's the concept of God DNA and spirit DNA. And, is there something more within our cells or panpsychism where where it's the belief that anything, within the universe itself has some kind of spirit or some kind of consciousness. But that's a super deep level that I don't know if we'd be able to figure out to even say if this lab grown meat has a soul or not.
All right, great show, guys.
Hey, thanks, Tim. All right, now speaking of some of these crazy experiments, and we'll get, I'm going to kind of go through the timeline of it. Now, back in the 1800s, like I said, 1700s into the 1800s, the technology was changing, right? And you had a lot more, microscopes and work with electromagnetism. So there's tons of experiments trying to figure out if people have an afterlife. And there's several, which pretty much is kind of like what Frankenstein is based on, these type of experiments. Luigi Galvini is one of which is where the word galvanation comes from. He was trying to figure out if, originally what happened, he was doing an electrical experiment, and he watched as a scalpel touched a dissected frog on a metal mount, and the frog's leg kicked. And then further experiments led him to theorize that the living bodies contain an innate vital force that he called animal electricity. And in 1791, he published his findings, and his provocative theory set the world of science on fire. Then there was Italian physicist Alessandro Volta, which is where the word volt comes from. And he repeated his experiments because he believed that, this was not true, and concluded that it was the two metals alone that were responsible for the electric charge. Now, what's interesting is that Volta's findings led him to develop the first battery capable of continuous electrical current, known as the voltaic pile in 1800, composed of a stack of alternating discs of copper and zinc, separated by cardboard soaked in brine. It was pretty much a game changer in the study of electricity. I mean, so it's interesting that one scientist essentially trying to disprove another.
Yeah,
basically led to what we use as batteries now.
Yeah, I remember learning about him in school, but I didn't remember hearing about that was his reasoning to go into creating the battery.
It kind of reminds me of Edison and Tesla, where with the Edison created the electric chair trying to disprove Tesla.
Yeah.
But that eventually led to the AC/DC current that we now use.
Yes, absolutely.
And so these two, trying to figure out if the life force is some kind of electrochemical thing, both created different forms of science. The battery and the galvanization process. So that's kind of interesting what things can lead to. Even when you're working in kind of fringe areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those are kind of fringe things to study, but they led to insurmountable change in our life today. Think of anything we could do without a battery in today's world.
Exactly.
Would be zero things.
Yeah, totally. Before I get into some more of these experiences, take another phone call. We got Bob in Brookfield. What's going on, Bob?
Yeah, hello. Actually, my name is Weston. I like to go by Weston. It's my last name, but I gave Bob because that's my actual first name. But in any event,
hey, Weston.
This concept of life force. I practice Nichiren Buddhism. I've been Buddhist for 30 years. And the concept kind of is in a nutshell. In this practice, everything is backed or based by science. Any question you ever ask is never given an answer of, you just have to believe because we don't really know. Mm-hmm. No, everything is based on science and logic and understanding. And so the idea of the soul or the life force is kind of like if you had a cup of tea. Mm-hmm. The tea is the tea and the cup is the container. If you dropped it to the floor now and it broke, now the floor would be the container and the tea would be the same. If they picked it up with a sponge, now the sponge is the container and then you squeeze it into a new cup. The tea has always been the same. The container has changed over time. And so the idea of the life force is the thing that gives you life. It's the thing that leaves your body when you die and goes to another place that's undetermined. We say that it's in the world of Ku, which means it's kind of like a waiting place for your next lifetime, for your next container. And so depending on what type of life you've lived, if you've lived a good life and created value with your life, you've tried to help other people, blah, 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 then your next lifetime is most likely going to be something that where your karma has brought you to a life that's as good as it was before and maybe better. If you're someone who is evil, who hates people and who despises and tries to demean them and so on and so forth, you might be reborn to a new life to a black girl in Africa that lives in poverty because you were a rich person who tried to hurt everybody else.
Right.
Okay, so what goes around comes around, karma idea. But the main idea is that your life is a life force. It's energy. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It goes on forever. And so therefore your life has always been, it is now, and it always will be in the future. It'll just be in a different container depending on circumstance from time to time of when you died and where you go.
All right. Well, thanks for the Buddhist viewpoint, Weston. And you're going to, if you stick around listening, you're going to like one of these experiences because you're talking about energy not being, you can't create or destroy energy. And it has existed since, like what I was talking about earlier, since the Big Bang. Everything that is here now has existed since then. And there was an experiment where they did that, in essence. But before
cool. Well,
So
second time I've talked to you, and I've enjoyed it both times. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks a lot, Weston. Have a great day. And so, getting back into the experiments, one of the craziest ones, and you've probably heard the name because there was a movie called 21 Grams, but it was actually based on this experiment back in 1907. And it was done by a physician, reputable physician, named Duncan McDougall. And he was trying to weigh people at their time of death to see if the soul had a weight. And he actually worked with a consumptives home, which was a charitable hospital in Dorchester for late-stage tuberculosis, which at the time was incurable. So he built a large scale, which is capable of holding a cot and a dying patient. And I guess, tuberculosis was a good disease for the experiment. I'd say good disease, but it was for this experiment because basically people couldn't, he described it as they died in great exhaustion. So they weren't going to move around. They weren't going to wiggle and mess up with the scale.
Right. They just lay in.
So it's just, yeah. So basically he had these people on the scale. He'd weigh them before and he'd weigh them after. Now, the interesting thing is that the 21 grams thing gets locked in, right? So that's where this kind of title comes from. But in actuality, the 4 people that he did this with all didn't weigh 21 grams at the end. It was in 1901, not 1907, but it was 1901. So the first patient died and there was a 21 grams difference. Now he says that he tried different things. He tried to do, was it water weight? Was it breath? He did all of that to kind of, take those out of the way. And he said it wasn't that. Now, the next person who died was only 14 grams. It was a woman. And then his third case was 28 grams. Now, he did say that it seemed to be, there was in his fourth case, he threw it out because the scale wasn't well calibrated. And he said, due in part to a good deal of interference by people opposed to our work.
Interesting.
So I don't know if this was people at the hospital he was at or activists or religious people. I don't know.
Finding him throughout the day.
And messing with his equipment. And then he repeated the experiments on 15 dogs, which no one knows how he got 15 dying dogs. And that with all 15 dogs, there was no loss in weight.
Interesting.
Which to him made sense because he said,
that only humans.
That dogs don't have a soul.
Yeah.
So he did say there should be more experiments with this. He didn't really do any more, but it's an interesting take on it. I just fascinated at the fact that someone would even try it.
Yeah.
It's
like a very
it's an interesting, and then it gets into the whole, like Weston was saying, because, energy. So there was a chemical engineer named Dr. Jerry Nahum, who was a physician at Duke University School of Medicine. And he developed a hypothesis that the soul or consciousness must be associated with information, which is equivalent to a certain amount of energy. And that goes into the whole E equals MC squared, energy equals mass times speed of light squared. And this energy essentially could be weighed with sensitive enough electromagnetic instruments. But as of 2007, he had not gotten funding for this experiments. But I do have another one that's very similar to what he was trying to do. And I will get to in the next segment. So let's take another phone call before we head to break. We got Roosevelt. What's going on, Roosevelt?
Hey, guys. Thank you for taking my call. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Interesting subject. Hey, listen. I'm going to follow up on what the last gentleman was. Weston, or what's his name?
Weston.
I like what he said. See, I was raised Catholic, but I firmly believe, and I really believe in this, that karma comes back and gets you at the end. Now, what Weston said was interesting. Everything he described of a person that has done horrible things. Well, we have it right now. One of our candidates is very cruel to anybody that doesn't agree with him, doesn't go with his, doesn't give him his loyalty, and very, very cruel. So, I have 2 questions for you guys of the same subject. Do you think everybody has a soul? I give you a perfect example that somebody that might be, in my belief, soulless, doesn't have a soul. Nothing moves them. I mean, is there any example you could give me of Trump where he's had compassion, where he's had even an inkling of show of a human being that, and that's another thing on the same subject of karma. Everything that he says, notice it comes back, and it's him. He accused Mexicans of being rapists. He went to court.
Mm-hmm.
He was charged with a sexual rapist. You could say he's a rapist. He's done it with who knows? Because what about the cases that haven't been brought up by 26 women that he, accused him, but never took it as far as E. Jean Carroll?
Yeah.
So, but I want you to concentrate on what I'm saying.
No, I hear what you're saying.
But
it's like you could pick, and I'm no Trump fan, but you could pick a number of people in history you go into Hitler, Mussolini,
I was gonna,
Genghis Khan.
Exactly. I was gonna mention that too, and don't forget one of the biggest one, which is Hitler.
Well, I said that's what I said.
Those guys. Yeah, and notice that they all have something in common. Have you ever seen that documentary? Funny you mentioned Mussolini. Have you ever seen a documentary on him? Guy was a coward at the end.
Oh,
He's
I'm sure.
Coward.
Yeah. Yeah,
and that's exactly what these guys are. And look at this guy, Trump.
Yeah,
he's a coward.
Well, I love where you're going with it, but I'm already asking a hard enough question. Is the soul quantifiable? Now you're trying to ask if evil people have a soul. I don't know. I think that's what Weston was saying, though, is that everybody does. And, according to the Buddhist tradition, and that if, the karma is going to get you in the next life. So we'll see. It remains to be seen. But we got to take a break, Roosevelt.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you for the call.
Have a good weekend.
You too, Roosevelt. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get into a couple more of the science experiments to prove if the soul is quantifiable here on Think Theory Radio right after this.
WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
Welcome back to Think Theory Radio. Today we're asking the question, is the soul quantifiable? And scientists have tried to figure this out throughout the years. And most recently, this one is it's pretty interesting because they're using scientific and verifiable methods. And this is a Benjamin Sherlag, Ronald Sherlag, Taryn Desari, and Sonny Poe of the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center. And several years ago, were exploring the concept of the soul. Now, what they did was they observed the behavior of a single-celled dwarf organism derived from Stentor coeruleus. Coeruleus, I think is how you spell it. Pronounce it.
Okay.
I always butcher a lot of words on the show.
As long as the ideas get put out there.
It's Coeruleus, so I think it's Coeruleus.
That sounds, yeah.
It also sounds like a Roman emperor. Coeruleus Maximus.
Emperor God or something. Yeah.
Now, this is what I was bringing up to Tim, about does a cell have a soul? And so the Stentor coeruleus is typically between 0.5 and 2 millimeters in size. It's known for its ability to regenerate itself. And when subjected to dehydration, the single-celled organism is disrupted. And after being rehydrated, it undergoes a cell division process whereby one cell develops into 4 mobile dwarf cells. These dwarf forms make an appealing model to study behavior that might hint at the existence of a soul, which is why they picked this one for their experiments. And, you can't cut up live humans to do this, so you got to use cells. Yeah. No, I think also, too, is trying to dig deeper, see if the soul is on a microscopic level.
Right.
And to conduct the experiments, Dr. Sherlag and his colleagues used deep well microscope slides, filling the wells with the stentor cells. These slides were left uncovered for 24 hours, leading to the evaporation of liquids and the consequent death of the cells. And they did not survive when dehydrated. Then the researchers rehydrated the small wells within the slides. They used a solution that nourishes the single-celled organisms and then observed what happened to the dead cells. Within 2 days, moving dwarf forms of the cells appeared. They ultimately covered these dwarf cells with chlorinated tap water, which is toxic to them, causing them to die. After the chlorinated water had been added to the samples, the dwarf cells stopped moving and became spherical for a period of 8 to 15 minutes. Some small blisters also started protruding from the cells, which is a phenomenon known as blebbing, which occurs when cells died. These blisters then retracted back into the cells, and a series of striking changes took place. The motionless cells progressively developed a replicate image of themselves that was released from their original structure. Within 20 to 30 minutes, this duplicated, transparent version of the cell gradually faded into the ambient environment. In other studies, a magnet was placed beside the slide to create a magnetic field spanning across the slide. The team found that prior to fading, the replicate retracted back into the dead cell to restore its mobile ability. Based on these observations, Dr. Sherlag and his colleagues hypothesized that the replicate image of the cell is essentially electromagnetic energy that is an inherent part of its living physical body. They also suggest that the replicate can be observed resides in the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum detectable by the human eye. When the replicate fades, on the other hand, it moves into the non-visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And then finally, the researchers examined their observations further in the context of known physical laws, particularly linking them to quantum theory, which suggests that matter can exist as particles or waves. And while these states are entangled in a coherent way under specific conditions, in this case, life-death interphase, they can be separated through so-called decoherence. And they went on to their hypothesis even further. They recently conducted a follow-up study where they tried to use the electromagnetic field to force the replicate back into the dead cell body. They also documented the transmission of the replicate into the surrounding environment and its return into deep well slides. Subsequently, they placed 2 glass jars of the original sample in a tightly sealed plastic container, one containing tap water and the other substance that promotes the growth of a single-celled organism. And after several days, the transparent cells accrued particles characteristic of the original dwarfs, leading to a repeat of their previous life cycle, followed by death in clusters of the cells. So based on these observations, they hypothesized that the post-death phenomenon they observed in stentor coeruleus cells is a trait that applies to all other living organisms, including humans. This trait may essentially be a confirmation that living organisms are made of 2 different parts, a body and a soul, which are separated after death.
That's fascinating.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Now, we'll see if, this can be repeated
by
other scientists, which is usually what needs to happen in order for something to be, and get it peer-reviewed and everything like that.
Right.
But it's still a pretty interesting examination and experiment in itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To kind of get some inklings of the first steps of concrete evidence of something, the phenomena that we're all kind of aware of but don't have any tangible proof of.
Mm-hmm. And if this is true, that means we can't eat the lab-grown meat.
That's true. Wait, actually, yeah, true.
So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
There are a couple other things I wanted to get to. We don't have a whole lot of time left. I did want to mention 2 of the opposing views, which basically there was a cardiologist named Dr. Michael Sabin, who dealt with a lot of near-death experiences, and he was saying that after, working with all these people, he said that it's not an afterlife. They do what near-death experiences are important, but it's not an afterlife. Brian Cox, who is a scientist at CERN, which is the Large Hadron Collider, says that ghosts don't exist because if they were some kind of energy or particle formation, we would have detected them in the particle accelerator.
Right.
Which I thought was kind of a funny statement from a renowned physicist. And really quickly, the God gene, which I talked about earlier, is a hypothesis based on a combination of behavioral, genetic, neurobiological, and physiological studies. And the belief is that the human spirituality is influenced by heredity, and that a specific gene called vesicular monoamine transporter 2, which is VMAT2, predisposes humans towards spiritual or mystic experiences. And this was proposed by geneticist Dean Hammer. So just thought that was a little interesting
Yeah.
tidbit to add in there to sprinkle.
Absolutely.
At the end of the
Unrelated, but that's
show.
a very sick name.
Yeah. All right. I want to thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to our callers. We'll be back again next week and every Saturday, 6 to 7 p.m. right here on WCPT 820 Think Theory Radio.